This evening, our presentation, a panel presentation on Get to Know Your Quaker Neighbor. This is part of a multi-series series on getting to know folks from different religious or not religious traditions. And we are delighted that we are, how many have we done? 5? 7. Okay, we have done 7. I'm Linda Neerman. I'm the pastor at the Presbyterian Church here in Holland, and I will let my co-moderator introduce herself.
Hello, welcome. My name is Jen Mannanen, and I am a humanist representing Holland's Openly Secular Alliance. And I'm a New Hollander here for 2 years now, so yay. All right, so we're going to start with introductions of our Quaker neighbors, starting with Jay Baslier. Is a Quaker, dog lover, feminist, a faculty of women, gender, and sexuality studies at GVSU, where they teach classes on social change, feminist and queer theory, activist history, and in their free time, Jay enjoys gaming, fiber crafts, and exploring the natural beauty around us.
Jay, would you like to come up and take a chair? You get to pick, you're the first one. And we have Thomas Brouwer. Thomas was born in Holland, where he attended Christian school. He eventually joined an evangelical organization as a photographer on mission ships. After returning to land, Tom's brother introduced him to Friends Silent Worship, and upon returning to Holland, he joined the Holland Friends meeting. Thank you, Thomas, for being here. Welcome.
Next, we have Ruth James, and she's a retired teacher and current master coach. She's originally from New York State and raised her 4 sons here in Holland. Welcome, Ruth.
Walt Marston is an elder Quaker living in Grand Rapids and a member of the Grand Rapids Friends meeting. He writes essays and facilitates dialogue on spiritual and social justice issues and is particularly involved in clearness and discernment processes. He is married and the father of 3 grown children. Walt, welcome.
And lastly, we have Deborah Whickering, and she's a professor emeritus of anthropology at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids. She joined the Quakers while studying and living in Sheffield, England. Welcome, Deborah. All right, and Walt has created 2 slides to introduce the various Quaker denominations, so the audience is aware that panelists reflect only one denomination.
We don't want to spend too much time on this because I think most of what we have to talk about and the questions and answers will take place with the panel. But we did want to at least start with this particular slide. I have a couple of slides here. The first one is kind of, I put this together based on numbers from a book by a British author done a few years ago, in which he estimated the number of Quakers in different categories. I think most people, particularly in Michigan, particularly in Holland and Grand Rapids, have one impression of what a Quaker is, and we fall in one of those categories. But anyway, so this just kind of shows generally how things philosophically or theologically are separated around the world. This is worldwide numbers. About 280,000 or 83% fall in the evangelical category in blue, and then in the gray, 55,000 or 16% are liberal Quakers. And then that little sliver, 1,500, less than 0.5%, are conservative Quakers. And but they're not conservatives in the sense that we usually think of conservatives. They're more, they represent a really small community, a real tiny sliver of the total population that seek to go back to the origins of things back in the 17th century. And be as authentic as possible to the way things were back then. And sometimes they wear plain dress like the Amish. Not always, but sometimes they do. And they really try to live the life as it was originally in the 17th century. And evangelicals about half of this number is in Kenya, actually. Kenya has a lot of Quakers, and they tend to be evangelical because they arose from missionary efforts starting in the early 20th century. But we represent the gray area, about 16% of Quakers, about 55,000 worldwide, which are liberal Quakers. So philosophically, they fall into these categories. Let's go to the second slide. Thank you. I decided to add this slide because I think it does a better job of indicating the worship styles and ways that the different, well, mostly worship style of the different programs. Now, the unprogrammed up here at the top are the liberal Quakers. Really called unprogrammed because we worship in silence and we don't have a program. We just worship in silence and wait for the Spirit to speak. That whole segment in the first slide that we call evangelical really, go back to the next one. Really, this whole swath right here, both programmed and evangelical. So evangelical isn't always considered evangelical. It's programmed or pastored meetings, and these groups began to split off and go down different paths in the early 19th century to the unprogrammed, more liberal, and the conservatives. And I point out that the conservatives and the unprogrammed and the liberals are both unprogrammed, whereas the others tend to be pastored meetings, churches, regular churches with services and things like that. The thing that in common that all these Quakers have would be, there's more than one thing in common, but one thing would be the peace testimony, that they're all kind of about nonviolence and peace and the direct experience of God and that sort of thing. So I think I've already gone on too long, but that's kind of a summary of different types of Quakers in the world.
We'd like to start out by asking each of the panelists to give us a quick 1-minute overview of who you are by sharing your work, your hobbies, and where you attend Quaker meeting. And if it's more than a minute, we're going to go ding, 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 ding. No, we're not.
Okay, I'm Deb Whickering, and I retired from Aquinas. It'll be 2 years next May, and where I taught. And so since then, because I retired, I can take free classes. So I became a student again of art, and I've been studying drawing and life drawing and printmaking and loving it. And I'm doing a lot of gardening lately. And so I'm a member of the Grand Rapids meeting, and I've been attending at Red Cedar, Lansing Friends meeting.
I'm Walt Marston, and I am essentially retired too. I said it soon, but even though I've been self-employed for many years, and so it's hard to really call myself retired. But my hobbies are things like swimming and biking and hiking and walking and having coffee with friends. A couple of coffee groups that very regular, and then a lot of coffee groups. And so I attend the Grand Rapids Friends meeting. I've been attending there for about 22 years, and I think that's it.
Hi, I'm Ruth James, and I'm a master life coach and wellness coach here in Holland. I'm a retired teacher. I taught in Holland, Montessori, multi-age classroom, middle school math, and then 4th grade. I enjoy pretty much anything outdoors. I love my dog. I garden, quilt, sew, and knit, and I like to read. I'm an ally, and I'm pretty much up for any kind of road trip anybody wants to talk about. And I attend a meeting here in Holland.
Hi, I'm Tom Brower, and although I was born here in Holland, I left at the age of 18 with the idea that I would never come back. So that's just a good thing to never say never. I started life as a Christian Reformed person, but that was due to my parents' decision and not my own. And I soon became uncomfortable with the denomination, and eventually left it after refusing a profession of faith. I had too many objections. So one of them was that every Sunday I would go home with a big headache from being yelled at, for half an hour or more. I became an agnostic during the middle part of my life, and then I decided that I needed something more in my life, and I looked into various things, Methodism and Catholicism, Buddhism. I learned meditation with an Indian holy man in San Diego, and at any rate, I've gone through a lot of different religions, comparative religion, and so forth. And I've been a photographer all my life. I'm retired now. Somebody mentioned that I was a photographer on an evangelical mission ship for 6 years total at sea. And so I decided that Quakerism was right for me when, as was mentioned, my brother introduced me, and it just felt right because there was so few requirements in terms of what I had to believe to be a member. So it fit what I needed.
Hi, I'm Jay Basilaire. I misunderstood the assignment and put my work and my hobbies in my bio, but I'm a professor at GDSU. I am relatively new to West Michigan, so I've been here about 3 years, and I've been very grateful to the beautiful human beings at the Grand Rapids Friends meeting for helping me acclimate to this place.
Thank you, panel. All right, for our second question, we'd like to know if you prefer to be called a Quaker or a friend, and how did you find your way to Quakerism? I know some of you have touched on that. If anyone else wanted to elaborate?
It's funny when I thought about this question because I realized that if I'm introducing myself to someone, I'll call myself a Quaker because that's more easily recognizable as the religion or as the group. But among Quakers, I'll refer to myself and others as friends. So I was studying in Sheffield, England, doing my graduate study and despairing over the writing and trying to get somewhere with this dissertation I was writing. And I went to Quaker meeting. I was looking for support, and I sat among about 80 people who were in deep, deep silence. And I was and then someone ministered into the silence, which is what we do. And I was so touched by that ministry in that deep silence that I started to cry, and then I felt really embarrassed because there I was sitting there crying at my first Quaker meeting. And then afterwards a man came up to me and he said, excuse me, and he introduced himself, and he said, I have never been ministered to by tears. Yours were the first. And then I started crying again, and then he got all nervous in English about it and got, but so that's how I found myself among Quakers, and I knew that I had found the right place.
I generally like to call myself a Quaker. Like as Deb indicated, it's just easier when people ask you, what church you go to or something. It's a lot easier just to say I'm a Quaker, and it's kind of I enjoy that, but it's also in the context of meetings. Like to think of myself as a friend, and I came to Quakerism late in life. I grew up a Baptist in the UP, a little town called Iron Mountain in the UP, if anybody knows that. And it's a small Swedish Baptist church, very conservative, very fundamentalist. And so, you know, I was with that until I graduated from high school, and then kind of drifted away as people often do in college, and was really unchurched for many years, even until I got married back in '74, and married Sue in a little Catholic church looking out over Lake Michigan in South Haven. But neither of us were really practicing a religion or faith at the time. And then later on, when our first child came along, of course, Sue started going back to church, to Mass, and I remember saying, "Oh, Sue, you're not turning religious on me, are you?" But we're living in New Orleans at the time. Back in Michigan, I was searching for something that would fit for me, and I was having trouble finding it. And long story short, realized that there was there was a friends meeting just a couple of blocks from our house, and so I decided to come and try it out, and I really felt at home instantly when I walked into that well of peace, and so been with it, you know, for quite some time now. Took a little break at one point because I felt I needed a church with more music, and kind of drifted away and went to other churches for a while, but finally came to the realization that the Quakers were my friend. Grand Rapids Friends Meeting was my home, and you know, came back and been there ever since.
I'm with them. I identify myself as a Quaker, but I actually prefer the term friend because it seems more inclusive to me, and I like that. In part because the Society of Friends is inclusive, so I like to say I'm friend. My path to becoming one was really a long, I guess, lifelong journey, right? I was raised as a Christian, specifically a Presbyterian, and when we moved to upstate New York, there wasn't a Presbyterian church close enough for my father's liking. So he went to this Reformed church, right? What's that? So then I ended up at Hope College, whatever. Mind blown, because now there were like Christian Reformed people. And I didn't really understand the difference, but learned about it. And so worked at a large evangelical church in Holland as an early childhood director. It didn't work out particularly well, and I left. And I'll be honest, I got sick and became disabled and spent 2 years in bed, staring out my window, thinking about all the things in my life. You know, my childhood, I'm adopted, relinquishment, foster care, all that stuff. And I realized that I didn't believe what I said I did. And so I was kind of left in this void of not knowing. So I kind of dabbled around in some other religions, including Judaism, because my birth father and some of my siblings are Jewish. And that didn't work. It's really hard to do that in Holland. And eventually ended up in Al-Anon because of some family situations, and was introduced to the concept of a higher power of one's choosing. Well, it never occurred to me that I could do that. I thought I had to like choose from column A or B, and neither was going to work for me. So I just kind of was drifting. But once I could define my own higher power, and that took a while, like work in progress, a while, to be able to do that, I was able to have a broader definition of a higher power or God of inclusion, of what that meant, of respect, and what that meant. And so I began to think more critically about pretty much everything. So actually what really happened is there's a Stand for Peace in Holland on Saturday mornings, and I was doing that, and someone invited me to a meeting. And I'd been to one before. I'd been to one in New York. My birth mother's actually a Quaker, as are my maternal siblings. I'd been to a meeting in New York. I went to one in Holland decades ago in someone's house. And so I went to the meeting, and I thought, yeah, this is kind of actually who I am. It's who I want to be. It's how I want to think. It's how I want to think about people. It's how I want to think about people's ability to think for themselves and make choices for themselves. And that's who Quakers are. So that's how I ended up here.
I guess I prefer to be called a friend, although when somebody asks me, what church do you go to, I tell them that I worship as a Quaker, because I think Quaker is more universally known than friend is, and friend is confused with social friends. So as a title, then I would prefer Quaker if somebody asks what I am. I learned about Quakerism through my brother, who was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War, and I really admired that a lot. And so he's my older brother also, so he's my idol, right? Which most older brothers should be, I think. And he introduced me to the Quakers because, well, he was acquainted with Quakers, being a conscientious objector, because Quakers have always worked a lot with conscientious objectors because of their peace initiatives. And so the first time that I went to a Quaker meeting was here in Holland, and it was at Western Seminary. I think that's about 7 years ago. So I'm a relatively recent Quaker. Came to it late in life after looking at a whole lot of other ideas. I find that most religions put God in a box by defining him with their doctrines and their dogma, and I don't think that's right, because I think God is huge. It's big. He's bigger than that. I mean, if you just look at the universe, you can see how huge it is. And if we're to believe that that's his creation, then he's incredible, way beyond what we can describe. So anyway, that's what I think about doctrines. I'm sorry if that offends you, but it took me a lifetime to come to that conclusion, really. And to me, that's a very freeing thing to realize that our higher power is so big and so powerful. So, my little aches and pains are really minuscule when it comes to universal concerns, or even earthly concerns. So that's how I found my way to Quakerism. It was a long road, but I'm glad I found it.
So I've been a friend for about 20 years, and like these humans, I prefer friend, although I'll say Quaker for legibility. I came to Quakerism fairly early in life because I was raised in a joint United Methodist, United Church of Christ congregation, like a small New England parish church. And I was really all in when I was a teenager. I looked at my pastor, his name was Pastor Rich, and I saw him doing so much good in our community and bringing justice into the world, and I wanted to be just like him. And so I was actually in high school, like doing like little trainings with him and like talking about going to seminary and getting my MDiv. And then in 1999 or 2000, the United Methodist Church passed this thing called the Open and Affirming Resolution, which basically just said that any human being, regardless of their gender expression or sexual orientation, could come into a congregation and be physically safe. And that really divided my congregation. About half of the people in this maybe 80-person church left and went to the conservative church across town. But before they left, I went to a lot of meetings where my 17-year-old self was watching adults I trusted scream at each other over whether or not I should be allowed to sit in a pew safely. And that broke me on Christianity. Floundering around, I went to Quaker meeting with someone that my mom was seeing at the time. And I found in that space a way to retain all of the things that I had really loved about the church I grew up in, the commitment to justice, the directive to do good in the world, without any of the baggage of Christianity or of having to call myself a Christian. And so that is, I think, the thing that is like most beautiful to me about the Friends is that we don't have a doctrine like most spiritual groups do. So some of us are Christians, some of us are not, and we can all sit in community together, and that's okay.
I want to thank you before we go to the next question for being vulnerable and honest and open about your faith journeys. In my tradition, we call it the faith journey. So thank you. It's very instructive and helpful just to hear the variety of ways you've come to where you are in Quakerism. So thank you. Would each of you describe one core Quaker belief that is important to you personally? I don't know if everyone has this spice handout. Is that something everybody has? Or if you can get it, okay. I have a spice Quaker testimony and values, but you certainly don't need to refer to this. Refer to whatever's meaningful to you.
Is this on? Yeah. So I would say, wait, is this the core value question? Yeah. The sort of core belief or core value that I think is most important to me is what I really hear as a directive to speak truth to power. So community and the kind of idea that communities are created by people who are all invested in each other's collective success is really central to how we practice in the Friends. And for me, that really translates into this directive or calling to use my voice for people who don't have a voice and to speak truth even when it's terrifying.
For me, I think the most important core belief is inclusiveness and how everybody deserves respect. And this is some core value of my own that whenever I've approached anybody anywhere in the world, I know that if I want to connect with them, I have to respect them as an equal and as equally valuable in God's sight. And I met my wife in '98 in South Africa, and she was born and raised in Malaysia, part of the Chinese community there. And when she grew up, she went to school with Muslims, with Buddhists, and with Hindus, and with Christians of all stripes, and with secular people, non-religious. And for her, that was a really precious thing. It like made life bigger for her. She had very good Muslim friends. You know, she has no fear of Muslim. And that's kind of unusual, I think. So I mean, everywhere I've gone, I've felt very, very safe. And especially in Asia, you know, where a lot of us would just be totally lost there. You know, where do I go? Who can I speak with? What language are they using? It can be quite confusing. But I've always felt very, very safe there. And, you know, Malaysia is run by Muslim. The power structure there is based around the Muslim, and they're not even a majority there. They have the largest minority group, but you know, there's so many other people groups there that they are like about 40%, but they're well liked. You know, when they have the high holy days for so-called. For the Chinese, for instance, Chinese New Year, that's celebrated by the Muslims too. And when the Muslims have their New Year, then the Chinese celebrate with them as well. So they celebrate all the holidays, and you know, with a multicultural country like that, they have many holidays. And she feels cheated out of holidays when when she moved here, we only have 10 or something like that. And you know, she's used to 2 a month or something like that. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways of living. You know, and we live such sheltered lives if we don't ever leave our little enclaves. I think Quakerism helps open your mind to the other.
I'm going to go with integrity. And somewhere I have that written down. I can't find it. There it is. Authenticity and integrity are everything. Like that? Louder? Okay, I can get louder. You know, life isn't about what you have, it's kind of about who you are. And there's so much about the haves and the have-nots and who's got what, and it's, to me, it's just off-putting. And I value authenticity so much personally. Growing up, before I moved to upstate New York, I lived in a really diverse world. My neighbors were Orthodox, Serbians, Greeks, Jews, Catholics, lots of different colors on my streets. Was a Christian in my classroom. I was the only white kid in my Girl Scout troop. So I grew up with a whole lot of diversity, and nobody talked about what religion they were. People were just like who they were. And so if I liked somebody, I liked them because they told me the truth, and they were my friend, and they were real. It wasn't anything about where their dad worked, or what their mom did, or how many siblings they had, or where they went on vacation, or any of that stuff. So authenticity and integrity have always been a real big deal to me personally. Letting my life speak for who I am rather than my words. I mean, it would be great if all my words matched up with the way I acted or my life. But that's my goal, treating others with respect and honesty, no matter who they are or where they are, because we're all just people. We're all the same. There is, and Jay mentioned it, that interconnectedness, we're all connected. And for me, being a friend or a Quaker not only allows that, but encourages it. There is no doctrine that says, this is what you have to believe. And if you can't believe this, you can't come in our club because we're going to keep you out. Because they don't do that. It's inclusive. So that it allows for all kinds of critical thinking. It allows for people who are Christians, people who maybe dabble with Judaism, people who believe their strength comes from within themselves. And it's all okay, because we're all valuing who each other are and each other's ability to think critically. Let's see, what else would I say? We all have gifts, and so often people's gifts are snuffed out, maybe even starting in childhood. And I've found among friends that people watch for each other's gifts, and they're encouraged, and nobody's spoken over, and everybody's valued. So the people I know who would identify as Quakers or Friends are so kind and so loving and have such depth of character. And I value that. So thanks.
I think the one core Quaker belief that is most important to me is the concept of continuous revelation. The fact that the truth was not something that was written down 2,000 years ago and that's it, but that we're continuously seeking new truth, and it's continuously being revealed to us in new ways, sometimes in written ways, sometimes in spoken ways, but that it's continuous, and we're always seeking. We have a seekers meeting coming up at our meeting this coming Sunday, where we'll be talking about issues. We hold these things occasionally, primarily, I guess, for people, for new people who are wanting to know more about the Friends and learn more about us. But I find that in terms of seeking, it's a reinforcement of my belief that we're continuously seeking for the truth, and it's continuously being revealed to us in new ways.
I guess the belief would be that I, you, and every one of us has a direct connection to the divine, and that there is no real need for an intermediary or someone that I have to go through in order to reach the divine. So what's important to me is the practice. And sitting in silence, as I mentioned in one of the first things that I said, sitting in silence with others, and we call it waiting on the Spirit, or waiting worship. And we're just all in silence sitting there, and what we're doing is we're listening in silence for what may come up. And when it comes up, the first time it ever comes up, it's very difficult because, and then you kind of squirm a little bit and say, I'm not going to say anything. And then it comes up again, and pretty soon you know, yes, this is a ministry. So we're all ministers. And then when you speak into that silence, or when someone speaks into the silence and I'm silent, it goes so deep, and it's so profound. And I know as I'm sitting in silence and waiting in worship, when something comes to me, what we call a leading, I know so deeply that it's right for me, that what we Quakers say is I'm convinced. And so the silence and the practice of sitting in silence, I don't know if that's a belief or a practice or what, but there's that direct connection. And when you're with others in waiting worship, it deepens, and sometimes it goes into what we call a gathered worship, where you're in the silence. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but all of a sudden everything deepens and goes deeper, and then pretty soon you're in this kind of bliss state where you're no longer in a body, but just with God, and it's beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that with us, panelists. This event is part of our acknowledgement of the International Peace Day, established by the United Nations as a day devoted to the ideas of peace, both within and among all nations and peoples. We have a lot to learn from the Quakers about pacifism and peacemaking. So panel, what does pacifism or peacemaking mean to you?
So when I first came to the Quakers, I was very committed to pacifism as a concept. That was actually one of the things that drew me to the Friends, because it sort of aligned with what I already knew about the world and my values in it. And I still, to some extent, hold a relationship to pacifism, but recently I've been really reframing that for myself in terms of a sort of directive to center or preface nonviolent communication and action. And the reason I've made that shift in my thinking is because a lot of my friends, particularly people of color in activist circles that I move in, have pointed out to me that pacifism and passive resistance is a privilege that not everybody has. And so in moments where, for example, your life is on the line, you're actually in danger, pacifism isn't always an option. And so that's something that my thinking has really been evolving on recently. And so I would say that now I think more in terms of centering nonviolence than I do in sort of traditional understandings of pacifism.
Yeah, pacifism is an important core belief of Quakers, and this is one of the main things that drew me to becoming a Quaker eventually. But you know, even as a Christian, you know, Jesus was the Prince of Peace, and I don't think a lot of Christians really are interested in expressing that. I mean, it's a metaphor, right? I mean, I've always been drawn to pacifism ever since I was quite young, and you know, when it came time to register for the draft, I did it reluctantly, and I realized that there's no way I could ever go, because, you know, if I came face to face with somebody, and we both had rifles in our hands, I wouldn't know what to do exactly. I think I'd want to shake his hand, but, you know, I think I'd give him the first chance to pull the trigger. But I don't know. None of us know what we would do in a situation like that. But I didn't want to get into that kind of situation. Anyway, carrying this whole idea with me throughout life, I never did have to go into the military, which is fortunate for me. But I do believe in national service. I think that's a really good idea. But there's a lot of ways we can serve other than the military, other than by violent means. And I just see violence itself as the dark side. And we're, as Quakers, we're seekers of the light. And I've been a seeker of the light all my life. And I think I've found what, for me, connects me with the light most closely. So, yeah, to me, it's being in the light, and it's not like a person can ignore the dark side. I think you have to constantly fight and struggle against it, and that's why I do the Stand for Peace on Saturdays when I can, and support peaceful initiatives all over the world. So the Friends offer a lot of opportunities for that.
I read something on Facebook, and I'm not embarrassed enough to tell you that I read this on Facebook. But it was so good that I thought I would share it. So this is a quote. "Peacemaking does not mean passivity. It is the act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice, the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer, the act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. And I loved that. And you know, I read it to a friend and they were like, that's awesome. And I said, I didn't write it. But, you know, in terms of like hurting someone, I've always thought I would not be able to do that. I live in the country, and when I moved out there, one of my son's, neighbor suggested that I get a gun. So I had some stuff to do, and I went to Grascap hardware store, and they were like, oh, you're so-and-so's mom. And I was like, yeah. And he said, yeah, you need a gun. And I was like, okay. And so he said, come on over here, I want you to hold this. And so I held a gun. And he's like, what are you gonna do when you open your garage door and there's a coyote? You're gonna need to shoot it. And I thought, I don't think I can do that. So I went home and I called one of my kids, and he said, okay, never mind about the coyote. Can you kill someone? And I didn't say anything. He said, no, I mean it. Can you kill someone? Can you do it? Can you look someone in the face and shoot them? Because owning a gun says, I am willing to kill you. I don't think you can do that. And we got off the phone and I thought about it. And I thought, I don't think I can do that. Now, Jay brought up a really good point. Earlier in my life, I had a stalker, and the police called me to tell me that the stalker was out and looking for me. And at the time, I was pregnant with my 4th child, and my 3rd child was still a baby. And I said to the police, you better get over here, because if anybody walks in this house, I'll kill them. And I was recounting that to a friend, and I was like, I actually said that. I said that I would kill someone. And it comes down to, if you have to protect someone, maybe that's necessary. And maybe it is privilege to be white and middle class and have the ability to say, I don't want to involve myself in that. So I don't know where I stand on that either. I'd rather not kill anybody. But as I was talking with a friend earlier today, if somebody threatened one of my grandchildren, I couldn't say what I would do. I would hope that I would be able to use words, but I would really know that I don't want my grandchildren to be hurt. So yeah, that's what I think.
I think I've always considered myself more of a peacemaker than a pacifist. But my history is, before coming to the Friends, was quite interesting. Of course, I grew up in a very conservative environment. In college, I was in ROTC, so when I graduated, I had a commission in the Army, and over the years, the reserves, I ended up, I think, before I ended my time, I was probably a captain in the Army. Fortunately, I didn't have to go to war. I didn't have to, the closest I got to firing a gun was on a firing range. So I don't think too much about that. I can't imagine myself picking up a weapon and using it against anybody today. But I think the way that I practice my peacemaking is more in helping people to discern their way, whether that's in clearness committees or other types of discernment processes. I believe that ultimately peace is an inside job. That it's all about finding peace within ourselves before we can find it in others. And so I kind of continue to work on myself, first of all, to try to find peace within, and then to see it in others and help others find peace.
I was on a bus one day, this was when I was living in Sheffield, and I became aware that I was judging other people. I don't know if you've ever done it, and I've kind of been aware before, but I was fatter than I am. The mascara's all smeared. She's older than I am. And I was making all these judgments, and so once I became aware of it, I started the practice of just silently to myself saying to the person I just judged, I see God in you. I see God in you. I see God in you. And it shifted me so much, because one of our beliefs, excuse me, is that there's that of God in everyone, in each person. And I extend that to the whole of creation, in every individual plant, in every animal, in everything. There is that of God. And so to speak to God in the other person means it doesn't matter who that other person is. And so I guess in terms of peacemaking, speaking, as Jay said, speaking truth to power, that I don't care who you're talking about or how much I loathe the actions, I can speak truth to that person in power, knowing that there is that of God in that person as well. So no matter what they've done, no matter how they are, if I'm speaking truth, I can speak to the light in that person and know that it's there, even if I have a hard time discerning it.
Thank you to those of you who have sent in cards with questions. We have several that have come to our attention so far, and I know that if you have questions, someone will come pick them up. Would one of you, I think we only need one respondent, tell us where the word Quaker comes from? Who would like to address that?
There you go.
I'll attempt it. I may get this backwards. I think it goes back to George Fox being in court and being hauled before a court back in mid-17th century, and let's see, was it the judge that called him a Quaker? Or was the judge says he should quake before the law or something like that, and so the name just kind of stuck, and so what began as a derogatory term applied to the Quakers, applied to the Friends at the time, was adopted as a nickname, and it's kind of stuck since then.
There's an alternative story too that may go with the same thing, and that is that sense of feeling that you have before you actually give ministry in the silence causes you to quake inside. And outsiders noticed that and started calling people the Quakers.
Thank you for that. Another one person on the panel, if you'd like to address this question, does simplicity also equal staying away from consumer debt? Great question.
Go for it.
So I don't know that I'm speaking for all of us here, but I think I would say the answer to that is either yes, but, or no, but. So for sure, when we talk about simplicity, there's a sense in which that's related to the material world, but not necessarily in the way you might think. I think simplicity, at least for me, is much more about how you move through the world and how you interact with the world around you, and this sort of desire to not create complication where there doesn't need to be complication, and save your energy for the things that do matter. Which is all to say that, like, I think in an ideal world, yeah, simplicity might mean staying away from consumer debt, but we are Quakers under capitalism, and as a millennial in the room, I think that's just not always the reality.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The way the joke about Quakers goes that the Quakers are willing to give up all their possessions except for one thing. That's their books.
I could qualify. Quakers were some of the first war tax resistors, yet that has wavered over the years. Is there any Quaker policy that encourages war tax resistance within the Fellowship of Friends?
I'll talk to that. I do pay my taxes. That said, there is a history that's gone back and forth between war tax resistance and Quakers. Some Quakers do pay their taxes. Geez, I wish I could invite someone to come up and speak here. Some Quakers do pay their taxes. Others pay part of their taxes, but reduce the amount by what's considered the war tax. Some of those people then turn around and give that to organizations of their choosing, and other people do what they feel led to do with it. That's my knowledge of that.
I think maybe just to speak to like the policy part of that question, we are really not a people who have a lot of policies or rules. Since we're telling Quaker jokes, like the real joke about Quakers is that the only set rule is that there are no rules. So while I would still say it's a practice for some, there's no like policy mandating it because we don't really do policies mandating anything.
All right, another question from the audience. We want to know, what do you do at your meetings?
We all here are part of unprogrammed meetings. So we have no pastor, and there's no hierarchy. Nobody is in charge. We have different people doing different things, people who greet. We have a clerk who opens the meeting and closes the meeting and makes any announcements. And then we come in and we settle in. We sit usually in a circle and just settle into the silence. And then for an hour we sit in silence. And out of that silence, as I mentioned before, people may feel led to minister. And so they will stand up and say, friends, I had an experience this week, and then here's what this experience taught me. There was one that I remember where a friend stood up and said, friends, I was serving food at Meltrotter Mission, and a man came up and he asked me, he was a plain Quaker, and he asked me why I dressed the way I did. And I said, I'm a Quaker. He said, oh, your people helped my people when there was slavery. Your people helped on the Underground Railroad. Your people helped, and so thank you, brother. And then this friend said, so he sat down, and at first I felt my chest pride, and then I thought, what will we be known for 100 years from now? And so it's that kind of ministry that comes into the silence. And so then the meeting closes, and usually afterwards we'll have some fellowship, maybe some coffee and tea and biscuits or whatever, and meet. Sometimes there's a program after meeting, so someone will speak, or we'll have a program where there's a process of discernment on some queries or questions. And so that's what we do for our worship. On the first day, it's called. Sunday's called the first day.
How do politics come into play with Quakers? Are you open to all political parties or mostly liberal?
I'll take a stab at that. I'd say, we're very much for social justice, of course, and promoting social justice. I think in our meeting, certainly, it may not apply to all meetings, but in our meeting, we really we would not tolerate any partisan political activity, or we don't support, particular candidates or political action in that regard.
As a meeting. Individuals?
As a
That's
meeting.
different.
Yeah.
Go ahead. All right, I think that wraps up any other questions we have from the audience. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Just to introduce myself and say my name is Larry, and I'm clerk of the Holland Friends meeting. And Holland Friends will be meeting at the seminary. There's a paper on the desk back there on the table, a picture of how we meet there, sitting in a circle. And we'll be there on Sunday morning at 10:30. If anybody would care to join us, there'll be a sign out in front of the door where you come in on 13th Street, and we would welcome any of you to come. And there's always an opportunity to talk more about Quakerism and how you might find it or are interested in it, and we'd welcome any of you to be there.
You might add that it's the first, third, and fifth Sunday, so in case you're contemplating and try to come the Sunday after this coming one, there'll be nobody there.
Yes, there will, because it's the first Sunday.
Oh!
Not every month has a fifth Sunday, but this one does.
Thank you. Yep, the one more question. Go ahead.
There are a few other of us here from Grand Rapids Friends meeting, and we meet every Sunday, every first day of the week. Aquinas College has a center called the Brown Center, so any of you are welcome to be with us there, or if you know people in the Grand Rapids that would like to join us, our door is always open, and we frequently, almost every Sunday, have a visitor, so we're very accustomed to that. So that meets at 10:30 at the Brown Center at Aquinas campus.
Thank you.
I'm going to close us out with some announcements before we end our evening. My name is Jill Russell. I'm the facilitator of Holland Interfaith Allies, and I wanted to make you aware, I have to point at the right place, just have a couple of the topics that we're working on for some of our next events. We don't have any of it settled yet, so there aren't times and dates yet, but we are hoping to offer an interfaith experience sometime in the winter around a piece of theater. So we're working on that, and we will be sharing that information as soon as it's confirmed. And we are hopeful that one of the next Get to Know Your Neighbors will be on the topic of our Buddhist neighbors. So those are some of the things we have in the works. And one of the ways you can learn about the times and the dates is by being on the email list. So as you leave tonight, on the table where you entered, there's a sign-up sheet, and you can be a part of our email list and then hear about those events. But you'll also find a number of other things on the table back there, and I just thought I would share with you what they are. Kaufman Interfaith Institute is one of our very close partners, has helped us in getting started here in Holland, and their calendar for October is on the back table, so you can take a look at that. I'm doing this in chronological order. On Sunday, October 6th, there is an event that Kaufman is doing called Strangers, Neighbors, and Friends. And you can see a little bit more about that one in particular. One of our last, I think it was maybe our last neighbor event, was Get to Know Your Baha'i Neighbors, and our Baha'i friends are sharing with us that they have a very big celebration coming up, and you are invited to join them. For the group here in Holland, I think this is, oh sorry, that's the Grenoble one. For the group in Holland, they will be celebrating on Tuesday, October 29th, the bicentenary of the birth of Bob. And so they will be doing that on the 29th here in Herrick District Library at 6:30 p.m. And the Grand Rapids celebration will be on Sunday, October 27th at 2 p.m. So you can look for their brochures about that. The Holland Openly Secular Alliance has their 4th Saturday gatherings. This one says September 28th. What is the... Oh, we haven't come to September 28th yet. I'm losing track of my life. So, out of order, but this weekend, 7 to 9, they meet at 451 Columbia Avenue, and so there's a flyer about their event coming up. And then October 30th, Grand Valley State University has a flyer back there about their annual Interfaith Academic Consortium Conference, Why Religion? So those are all the things in the back. But before we close, I wanted to thank all the members of the steering committee who are here tonight. So if you're a part of Interfaith Allies, can you give a raise of the hand? I know Zahabia is here. We've got some people in the back, as well as our 2 moderators. But Patricia Riley, who has been a part of our group, is concluding her time of service with us, so she's making some moves out of the area. So we just wanted to say a special thanks to Patricia for all of her work. and wanted to welcome Jen Meninen, who is going to be kind of taking her place with us, representing HOSA. But if you're interested in joining us, we are always eager for new people to be a part of our work, to be with us. I know that we have a particular need that Patricia filled for us of doing the communication and marketing for us. So if anybody has some of those skill sets and would like to join us, we'd be really grateful to hear it. But let's conclude our time by thanking again our panelists.